Welcome, everyone. Thanks y'all for being here today. I love this like power station up here. We have these at GSU too. They're just not so big. Yeah, my name's Lizzy Storms. I was introduced by wonderful Francesco, who I met at a gallery of my artwork through Daria Fard, who was a presenter spring session. I'm a visiting lecturer of visual arts at Georgia State University. Yeah, speak louder. All right. And yeah, really excited to give this talk. I kind of threw something together about this topic that is really interesting to me as an educator in design and the arts, as well as like a visual artist who is creating an archive of symbols for my own practice. And I just want to say thank you to Professor Fedele and the school here at the Civil and Environmental Engineering at Georgia Tech. Thanks y'all for being here. So a little about me, if we need another bio here. I went to Rhode Island School of Design in Rhode Island, and I've just been exhibiting my work around the Northeast. My work is these kind of textured, layered abstractions that evoke human consciousness and environmental awareness in deep time. So I make abstractions about deep time. So I think a little of what to expect today is just a little introduction into this idea of symbols. Like, what are symbols? And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the language of vision. Like Gestalt psychology. I'm not sure if this is a familiar topic to any of you. And then maybe some symbols of infinity that I've picked up along my interest in art history and architecture. And these symbols tend to have a lot of geometry to them, so I'll mention some of that. And we'll go into talking about the symbols of the meander, the labyrinth, and the spiral. So I want to know, like, what are symbols? There's two sort of ways of thinking about a symbol. You can think about a sign, or you can think about a symbol. A sign is like a stand-in for something else. A symbol has taken on this new meaning with this work from psychologist Carl Jung into archetypal symbolism to mean like a symbol that pervades human consciousness at a different scale. Symbols, of course, don't always retain a unified meaning. They carry meaning based on one's culture and cultural background. So a meaning of a symbol is not always inherent, but culturally learned. And I think this archive for research into archetypal symbolism is a really interesting way to think about images and symbols, especially in this world we live in today, which is so proliferating with images. Here you can see a flip through of this book with some of the symbols: rain, storm, thunder, lightning, rainbow. And they're categorized and kind of synthesized into these wonderful different headings of the cosmos and creation and the human world and the plant world. And there's things we're all familiar with, but which we each think about in slightly different ways. Some quotes from a book I love about symbols: The Secret Language of Symbols. Is a symbol system is nothing less than a symbolic map of reality. Using a word to define a word is a little bit rough around the edges, but nonetheless. And a careful study of a symbol system can lead to a better understanding of our own minds and enable us to live more fully within them. Because we are these dualistic creatures. We live in the physical realm, in the spirit realm, and in our mental realm. And symbols are a form of communication, ultimately. Through throughout human history, anthropologists, you'll hear me getting anthropological, because as an artist, I get to follow my interests wherever they go, like a dreamer, rather than kind of focus in or silo in. But you know, anthropologically, humans have been making things always throughout the record we have, trying to communicate just something about their lives. So there's the study of signs called semiotics, symbols and signs. And then, like I mentioned, there's this sort of new 20th and 21st century study of archetypal symbolism. I'm going to talk about the symbols of infinity from that perspective. But how we got here to this point, the meanders, symbols of infinity, is through the river meander, which gives its name to this concept of meander. This is a little piece I found from Georgia Tech, the Associated Group. And there's a nice little simulation that was made showing what this meandering effect is. There it is at the top. It's the effect of the river sort of breaking its banks and charging a new course. And so this beautiful little video is about natural channel design, and kind of creating a space for a channel to meander within. And so I really like this little group that's working on that. But the river meander in present-day Turkey is where we get the word meander, and it's from the river Menderes. The name of the river became a common noun, meaning anything convoluted and winding, such as like the decorative patterns we'll see in a little while, as well as speech or ideas. And the common geomorphological feature you see here. This is a river in Peru that is winding and meandering. And you know, the meander causes some issues in engineering. Let's go back. Before we talk about those issues a little bit, you know, the course so exceedingly winding that everything winding is called meandering became a lesson in the ancient world. I think I skipped ahead on a video somehow. That's why I'm a little lost in my notes, but how did, you'll see this image is here, perfect reminder of where we are right now. How did the meander get a bad reputation that it has today? Like, why is the connotation of convoluted like a bad connotation, a negative connotation? So because in river and wetland ecology, convolution is generative. It creates micro ecosystems and gradients of difference along which life forms at different stages in their development can seek shelter and thrive and grow. The ideas of the river meander the meander coming from the river meander defies expectations of geometric perfection, undulates and waves across its valley, creating fertile soil, destroying and reforming ever-changing shorelines. And rather than tame it, the interlocking elements of earth and water became an enduring symbol of unity, infinity, and continuance, which resonates in art history across cultures and through time. And it's only in our hubris that we think we can dominate the worlds of nature. The earth will always remind us of our place in the cosmos, and of design principles that resonate through these symbols of unity can be a lesson to us, especially some engineers maybe in this room today or listening online, who are wondering how to move forward within the current sort of tumults of the human environment interaction and relationship that we're seeing play out through climate change. This is a great video. You can see all these different areas where water and earth come together and we're interacting as humans in these systems. You just have to remember not to try to control this force of nature of water maybe so much, and maybe allow its course so it can generate those fertile soils for us. So back to art. So art is omnipresent in our lives. It's omnipresent in our society. It's part of our lives, whether we take it for granted or not, and whether we relegate it to an arena in our lives where it's merely a fascination or an entertainment, we're nonetheless surrounded by it. And many of our preconceptions are shaped by artistic principles that were revived from classical time into modern life, especially in the West, here in the US in particular, which is founded on these neoclassical principles. So if there's these kind of resonating themes, it's because there's some history to it there. And more than that, I believe, art is not just ubiquitous. Everything in this room, for example, was designed by someone. Choices were made, and that's artistic creation right there. But art it's like a birthright for us as humans. I truly believe it's a form of not only expression of culture, but an expression of self. And looking at art holistically, we can almost see that art is a form of consciousness. It speaks for itself in a way that language sometimes gets in the way of. And I can definitely talk for like a whole hour, but I have a lot of nice pictures to show you of beautiful examples of the symbols of the meander and symbols of infinity in art and architecture, kind of focusing on classical examples, as you'll see. And let's talk now about kind of the language of art, the language of vision. So as a professor of foundations in art and design, if I walk away from here, it's not going to pick up my mic, is it?
I think it's fine.
Okay, I can like roam around a little bit.
Yeah, why don't you ask the speaker?
Can you hear me if I walk away?
Click. Yeah. You can ask them if they can hear.
If I walk away a little bit, can you still hear me? Can you give a thumbs up?
I can hear you.
Great. Thank you. Now we're like big. So as a professor or a lecturer of foundations in art, I teach like 101 level classes to students who are going into sometimes really diverse and different majors. I'll teach students who are going into graphic design and industrial interior design and maybe architectural pursuits, as well as people working in like fine arts who are making sculptural textiles, or ceramicists who are making forms on the wheel, or sculptors, painters, printmakers, everyone, all kinds of artists. So there's a language to vision, and I like to teach this to them, and I'll teach it a little bit to you today. It breaks down into a very sort of succinct and tactile grammar, much like any sort of written or spoken language, which there's elements and principles. The elements break down into these sort of recognizable, sort of visual, sometimes tactile elements of line, shape, texture, there's space, and some of the other visual elements can be color. The other one keep growing there. But these elements get organized within the principles of design, some of which are balance, repetition, emphasis, movement, and scale. And so organizing the elements is a function of our mind rather really than our eyes. The language of vision has been determined by our biology as well as our social conditioning. We've evolved over thousands of years to like distinguish elements within our visual field to aid us in survival as both predator and prey as we've evolved. And organizing the elements like I said, is a function of our mind as much as our eyes. So it's as much a mental activity as it is an ocular one. So it's this interplay of mind and vision is also evidenced in the human archaeological record, going back like tens of thousands of years, which some of the most long-lasting creative works by the human hand contain maps and symbols for directing us towards our position in the cosmos astronomically as we looked out and saw these points of light tracing lines in the sky. Beginning some of the first visual elements that you see there, point and line. So the principles of design were like laid out sort of thousands of years ago. Perhaps they are emergent rather than determined or invented. And the point, line, and plane create shape, texture, and space. And the principles of order, we have evolved to prefer are like these ones listed here: balance, repetition, emphasis, movement, and scale, which help us organize and filter, prioritize, and categorize and find patterns in the like cacophony of visual stimuli, because otherwise we would just get lost in everything there is to look at. Our mind has evolved so to have such a strong visual sense. Our eyes are really highly evolved to see detail. So we have to have a way to like filter things and organize and categorize. And that sort of has evolved into the language of vision and design that we use to both create works of art and analyze them. Aside from the elements and principles, if we're talking about vision as like a mental activity, there's this idea of the Gestalt principles and Gestalt psychology. Has anyone heard of this idea before? So Gestalt is this German word that means like the whole thing. And it's just a little clunky, like the English translation. So we just use this German word Gestalt, which means like the whole thing. Like I said, it doesn't translate quite easily, but we use the language of vision to like embody the detail and content of the artwork within the structure of the artwork. And then these Gestalt principles help us filter and organize the information, and we can break them down into a couple different categories like you see here. So analyzing these principles helps us reflect on how we see and perceive the world, as much determined by our state of mind as our vision. So principles of similarity mean that sort of like objects, things, visual elements that are grouped together, we relate as similar to each other. We group them. The principle of closure states that we imagine shapes as whole and full and closed rather than as separate. And there's some fun optical illusions for these. I wish I actually had included those in the talk, but there's the principle of proximity, which things nearby each other get grouped together, another sort of variation of similarity. And the principle of continuity says when we see a picture of something and it's overlapping something else, we know that the thing behind the thing we're seeing in front of it doesn't disappear and then like reappear. It's a whole thing that's there. And then this principle of like the figure and the ground is like a Gestalt principle that we use to distinguish features out of the visual field. So I point these out to remind you that symbolism and like reading symbols is like a ground up function of our minds as much as it is a top down function. The abstract thinking that it takes to make a symbol is much different than the type of thinking it takes to read and understand the communication, meaning of a symbol. And this kind of has to do with like psychology a little bit. So let's jump now into our symbols. The symbols of infinity and unity. Meander. Labyrinth. The spiral. So anybody into geometry?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
Fit?
very geometry,
I love
very geometry,
here.
especially this guy.
Geometry, how to draw their spirals over here for your viewing pleasure. But here's the geometry illustrated of a meandering river. You can see there is like a dashed line. It has a nice little arcing arrow point to signify to you the direction of the flow. And then from frame to frame, it's almost like we know so many conventions about how to read this image. It's like already just giving us its information. I love that about visual information. Me explaining it is almost taking more time than just looking at it. The river bumps up against the banks on these sort of right and left sides, pushing the bank around. And you get an oxbow lake, for example. Here is a more mathematical version of river meander geometry, where there's kind of even further abstraction and simplification of this physical phenomena into a new language, the language of mathematics, the language of geometry. Radius and curvature relating to, perfect circles and angles and arcs and rates of time and change are all encompassed in this wonderful diagram. That to me, I imagine someone in the future will find this and it'll be featured in like a museum, as an enigmatic artifact of early 21st century mathematics or something, or geometry. Meander. This is a beautiful detail of a map made by cartographer Henry Fiske, who mapped the meandering flow of the Mississippi River in the United States, which has caused problems as much as it's caused the area to be like the sort of center of human activity that it is, because it creates this fertile soil. I wonder if you can sense the balance of this meander as we go through and look at some of these photos. Balance is not so immediately obvious in this image here. But we'll talk more about balance. Perfectly balanced designs tend to be a little boring, so. One of these principles of design that was so well embodied by so much classical art was the principle of balance in motion. You can think of balance being static sometimes, but really balance is an active, it's an activity. It's a verb. So the meander is balance in motion. It's when a line goes for a walk and it changes its direction. But there seem to be some rules. It doesn't cross its own path. And it kind of keeps within a sort of fenced in area, like a river valley, really. It's a little formula for how to create a meander. So the meander embodies not only motion and movement and balance, but a symmetrical balance. You can see here in this sarcophagus carved in stone from Northern Europe. This interlocking meander design has like a high degree of convolution. You can see it turns in on itself a lot of times. And there's two examples of a meander in this piece, one on the body of the sarcophagus and one on the top. So why not asymmetrical balance? The meander is a design that is specific enough to convey a symbolic meaning, but open enough to be interpreted in many ways in art and architecture. Like it's very plastic in that way. So here we see like a trompe l'oeil two-dimensional fresco painting, but it's made to look like it's three-dimensional. And I think the balance of light and shadow in this example gives this particular meander a really nice asymmetrical balance. Meander contains this principle of the reversing figure ground. So I had talked about just the principle itself in Gestalt psychology of the figure against the ground. And these optical illusions, as well as lots of symbols and geometric designs from art history, have made us rethink the stability of a figure ground relationship and observe instances of a reversing figure ground. And what this kind of means, like psychologically, for a symbol is like frustration almost. It means like there's not a definite answer to which piece of the design is on top or not. So there's like no hierarchy. It frustrates our desire for like a clear hierarchy. And this piece shows a reversing figure ground in granulation of gold. I'll trace my finger along part of the meander, and you can see how wide its path is. It's very convoluted. It doesn't follow a very predictable path. As you can see, I'm just sort of going all the way down this fibula, which is like a pin for a cloak. And the space between the granules of gold are the sort of negative space that like holds the meander, but that negative space then itself becomes, it can be reversed into a positive image so that it becomes what's known as the Greek key. And so the meander and the key come sort of together in some later meander designs, like this one you see from a Northern European Celtic culture, granulated fibula and gold. We can see the spatial balance again of the meander. A lot of the examples I've found don't include the whole design because you have to think that the meander serves a real purpose and in practical design of space. It was used in the 2D plane to designate space, like literally within a room, a courtyard, a meander would be laid out in borders that frame architectural areas. So not only does the design in the 2D realm and the 2D plane contain spatial balance, it's used to create spatial balance in the three-dimensional world. And it's this kind of like overlaying and interlaced quality of the principles of design that I love so much about the classical world. Like this band of the meander, it's been given a three-dimensional treatment, so it appears to sort of recede slightly in space, catching light and shadows and shades of colored stone that remind us of the perfection this design sought after. But remember, it's an active perfection, like a perfection in motion. And you can imagine through this color light and shadow situation, maybe the Mediterranean sun. The meander contains the principle of progressive rhythm produced through the repetition of a shape that changes in a regular manner, generating a sequential pattern. We will also revisit this principle in the spiral. I love this example of the meander. It has like been doubled and made. It feels so much more like a maze. To me, to trace one of these lines is to like really make a lot of convoluted turns. It's hard to trace your eye across the lines in this design. And I think in the ancient world, the way this design was used was meant to slow you down. It was meant to ask you to trace this path and to feel the rhythm of tracing your eye down a linear pathway. To sense the order and the repetition there. But it's not a static repetition that's very even. It's an undulating repetition that changes its form. It seems to me like it would feel like jazz. And to feel the feeling of a meander, all you need to do is take a wobbly walk, really. But the meander is said to have evolved into another design that embodies unity and harmony, which is the labyrinth. So the labyrinth is not a maze. Let me make sure I have enough time. Yeah. So the labyrinth is not a maze. There is one way in and one way out that trace the same course. Here you can see some graffiti at Pompeii of a drawing of the Minotaur's labyrinth. And we just kind of have to wonder, like, what drove a person to inscribe this line into stone so that you could see it 2,000 years later? The myth of the Minotaur goes deep into the human psyche, where is anyone familiar with this myth? The Minotaur. It's from a Greek culture. So I'll tell you a little bit. The myth of the Minotaur goes deep into the human psyche, actually, where the shadow of ourselves is created from this unholy union of man and God, locked away out of shame and pity, and in the center of a magical labyrinth. Feeding the shadow demon preoccupies the culture of Minos, an island, a mythological island in the ancient Mediterranean, where young girls were sent to feed the beast. And the characters and elements of this myth, remember, are psychological constructs of our own selves as individuals, as well as selves in relation to our communities and societies at large. So what parts of ourselves are we deeming too shameful or powerful to bring up into our topside lives when we like hide them away beneath or inside these impenetrable fortresses? Their hungers drive us mad. But the greater lesson of the story of the Minotaur is that the triumph over this shadow is achieved through wit and cunning, like almost as if we can outwit our own psyches and release a trapped shadow energy from its bonds and transform it into a usable power in our lives. They're labyrinths from ancient Egypt that are less like the sort of conventional labyrinths. We'll see a little bit more that are very like refined and aestheticized. The labyrinth form in ancient Egypt is talked about as being like a pathway through rooms in a building that was just very, very convoluted, and it was made that way to basically trap an intruder who might be coming into the building, so they couldn't escape with whatever they were trying to get away with. These are labyrinth diagrams from Paleolithic times.
Paleolithic?
Paleolithic on the top left, yep. You have, I think, later stone labyrinth on the bottom left from Northern Europe. Celtic, and I believe the one on the bottom right is Native American. There's another wonderful labyrinth here. So I'm surprised you don't know the story of the labyrinth and the Minotaur. But nonetheless, this is an example of Theseus here has been said to kill the Minotaur who is in the center of the labyrinth. And they have to devise this whole plot to get him back out of the labyrinth because it's magical and it will trap him inside, just as it was able to trap the Minotaur for so long. While the meander is kind of like a ubiquitous symbol, it seemed almost decorative. The labyrinth is more enigmatic. It's usually shown only as one, as a singular. And the symbolic convolutions of the meander transform into the convolutions of the psyche in the example of the labyrinth. It's a meandering but purposeful path. The cosmic order present in the labyrinth has made it a symbol of wholeness and unity and transformation, a bit different than the meander. And while the convolutions of the labyrinth are enough to confuse the Minotaur into being trapped inside, it's our sort of proximity to ideas of the divine, which help us retrieve these parts of ourselves that are trapped in the cave. So Ariadne is a divine intervention in this story who provides a golden thread, which Theseus carries with him through the labyrinth and then uses to retrace his steps on his way out, having vanquished the monster that is like menacing the island of Minos and this whole kingdom. And so he comes out changed. Despite having traced the same path he came in on. There's some different symbolic representations of the labyrinth. You can see on the left, you would walk the path of the black line itself, Winchester, England. And then you can also walk the path between the stones in the example from a stone labyrinth from Weir Island. A labyrinth can also be represented sort of graphically or symbolically, again, as like a more simplified symbolic geometric version of a space between walls or a path to walk. That's shown in negative. You can see like a positive path on a negative space. If you walked in the space, you would get nowhere. You gotta walk the path, or if you walk the space of the labyrinth in this example, you make your way around these convoluted turnings. So the linear aspect of the labyrinth is twofold, or the positive or the negative the path, but like this interlocking sort of figure ground relationship that is frustrated and reversing. The path is only evident by its boundaries. And the borders of these paths are always shared with each other. So this is kind of, I think it's this like infolding, this idea of going inward, which is what brings it into the realm of being a symbol of this inward journey into the psyche. So it's about generation and specifically regeneration. So if the meander is about generation, and creativity, then I think the labyrinth is about regeneration and recreation. Here's a beautiful labyrinth from Notre Dame. And it would be, I think, a final phase of a pilgrimage. We'd be walking a path through countries, and you'd come to this labyrinth to complete your pilgrimage. And approach the altar, which is only beyond the labyrinth. So with 5 minutes left for my talk, I'm gonna breeze through some photos I compiled together. Labyrinth, and maybe we'll make it to the spiral section of my talk. And here we go. So just a few words on the spiral. Signify infinity, small and large. These ancient Mediterranean spiral designs show biomorphic quality. Later geometric designs show highly refined interlocking figure and ground relationship. That kind of defies resolution. You know, as you look at some of these spiral designs, you might ask yourself, is the design the black part or the white part, or is it the incision into the surface, or is it the part that's sticking out? Or with these monochromatic black and white versions, is it the black or is it the white? Well, you know, the ancient designs were multitudinous. They were able to hold multiple interpretations. And so the whole design, it's the whole design. It's not allowing you to be satisfied. Whereas some of these architectural elements are so beautifully satisfying and finalizing. As I was finishing up my thoughts on this particular slide, I was thinking about how the column, which is holding a sundial, looks like it's being squished by some like great force from above, and these spirals are like the expression of that extra energy, like seeking equilibrium. I had never thought about that before looking at this and thinking about the spiral. But as a symbol of unity, it spirals inwards, turns around, effortlessly spirals back out. These meandering spirals from Mediterranean mosaics are just beautiful to draw. So these couple drawings from a designer to move us into, maybe I'll show you.
You can also, you wanna also switch here?
Or both go to doctor. Yeah. So one of my favorite series of books, if you could get them, wooden books. They make a great series of these workbooks on sacred geometry. You can see different spirals, ones that have a even change for each revolution, one that has an uneven shifting change for each revolution, like a Archimedean spiral, and then a beautiful golden spiral, of course. Spiral that follows the shifting golden ratio, which is like a self-referencing ratio. Here's some of my beautiful sketches. I had been sort of studying these running ornaments, like the Vitruvian scroll, the key, the meander, and fret design. This that's like this classical wave pattern, as it was relating to fire, which is interesting enough because it's its own element of water and earth. And on my beautiful grid paper here, you can set up a really nice repeating spiraling meander. It's a really satisfying shape to draw. As you can see, it just kind of rolls. And that rolling effect really evokes the feeling of rolling waves and fluids. I think that's the first time I said fluid in this whole talk. The fluidity of these designs, it's not only so satisfying to make, it's very satisfying to look at. And like it contains these principles that don't ask too much from our Gestalt brain, which works so hard to like filter reality for us and make sense of it for us, that it's like a relief to look at. So I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Liz. It's a very beautiful talk. Any questions from our friend online? Carol, and Katie? And there is also Daria. Hi, Daria. We cannot hear you.
Oh, hey, how are you?
We're good. What about you?
I'm fine, thank you. It was a really great
Daria,
talk. I got late, but
she's
thank you, Lizzy.
maybe Daria, you want to introduce yourself and explain the relationship to Lizzy.
Oh, hey, this is Daria Farid, multidisciplinary artist, and we've been here at Georgia State, and we're working together, collaborating. Yeah, so Lizzy is my best friend, and yeah, she had a really great talk.
Yes. Thank you. Any questions? Carol, Katie?
I
No
don't know
questions
if-
here, but thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know the question, but just as a response, I really appreciate the connection of the aesthetic of the meander and the spiral, and thinking about it from the perspective of our minds. And especially that last comment you made at the end, that idea that there are some patterns that our minds find inherently calming, and that there's something really deep about that if our minds are trying to look in the world and create these calming patterns where it's not so obvious. So this idea of art that does kind of bring out that kind of calming pattern. It had a real, it resonated with me, that idea. So thank you for that. The other thing I was thinking about, my artistic practice is dance. And when you were introducing that idea of the meander and thinking about it as unifying, and the negotiation with the river, right? The negotiation between earth and water through movement. And I was thinking about that in terms of the body, because of course we have a primal meander in our spine, with the curvature of the neck, and then the middle back, and then the lower back, and our negotiation as we just walk through space, the negotiation between verticality and the horizontal earth behind us, the negotiation with gravity, and kind of like the resistance with balance and fall. So kind of brought that up for me. And in dance, we often use that idea of the golden thread that you brought up with the Minotaur's myth as well as kind of like helping to connect us to that vertical as we're engaged in movement. So not a question exactly, but you brought up a lot, and I appreciate the opportunity to think on that today.
Thank you, Carol. Any more questions from the audience, from the online friends, from the friends online? Okay, let's move to the in-person attendance. Any questions?
Yeah, how about y'all?
Yes, please.
So it seems that two of those patterns there, left-hand side, are like I think of when I look at the one on the right, I think of a Rayleigh Taylor instability.
Like this, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then
Fluid. It's
the one on the left.
fluid.
Yeah, they're so I guess, yeah, does every instability have an art pattern that you can find it? Yeah, if I were to pick up a book of like all the fluid instabilities, would I kind of expect to find patterns all throughout art corresponding to those?
Probably not, because it's a filtering mechanism, so you would find very less of them.
Oh,
But
sure,
ones which
so-
sort of contain, like as a symbol, like these do, the larger world of fluids. Like, you could even have a meander or like a spiral, this one comes to a point. Versus like its dark counterpoint, which circles around. And you could also just like soften that turn, like you see here. So it's more like an interlocking, even forces interlocking. This one I didn't even get a chance to really talk about today, but that one's really interesting. The Vitruvian scroll, yeah. Do you do fluids exercises or experiments?
Yeah, I do simulations.
Yeah, simulations.
I was gonna say if like, there's like hundreds of magnetohydrodynamic instabilities that produce really cool patterns.
Like the surface of the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. It's almost like, I think, making the patterns into like symbols is it's really interesting. It could be a really interesting thing to think about with, like you're saying, a lot of the simulation and modeling, and even the high definition imaging of the actual, mechanics and stuff going on off-world.
What about black holes? Spiraling black holes, spiraling,
Yeah.
spirals?
In a spiral galaxy.
Yeah, those go away pretty quick, but yeah.
Okay, but I'm pretty
simulation.
sure, there's some cool,
There's cool, yeah, like with like accretion stuff, yeah.
so, okay. Thank you very much. Let's thank the speaker. And, can you stop the recording, please? Now we're gonna go down. Thank you, Carol, and Daria. And so if you wanna come to Maison, there will be some pizza from Antico.